Good morning. I'm calling this public hearing to order. Today is Thursday, September 21st, 2023. The time is 9:31 a.m. I am at-large Councilmember Christina Henderson, Chair of the Committee on Health. Today, we will discuss Bill 25-259, the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. The bill was introduced by Councilmember Robert White, along with Councilmembers Allen, McDuffie, Louis George, Freeman, Bonds, Trayon White, Gray, Nadeau, and myself. The legislation aims to eliminate the examination requirement for licensure for associate and graduate social workers. By eliminating this requirement, these individuals would have the option to pursue licensure without the necessity of passing an examination, potentially simplifying their path to become licensed social workers. Furthermore, the bill introduces the establishment of a social worker licensure task force, which would identify alternative methods for assessing the fitness of aspiring licensed independent social workers and licensed independent clinical social workers. The task force would also formulate recommendations for a new assessment approach that would replace the existing examination for independent social work practice. Within a year from the act's effective date, the task force is expected to compile its findings, insights, and recommendations into a comprehensive task force for submission to the council. In recent years, there have been significant changes in the social work licensure, mainly regarding the role of exams in bachelor and master's level. Bill 25-259 aims to help associate and graduate social workers by recognizing some of the challenges the examinations may pose. Concerns also extend to equity and racial disparities. Some states, such as California, Florida, Illinois, have already eliminated these exams to promote diversity and inclusivity. However, there are differing opinions, with some advocating for rigorous standards to maintain the profession's integrity. Striking a balance between quality and equity remains a challenge we aim to address here today, and I'm anxious to hear some feedback from the public and our witnesses on our list today. I do not see any of my colleagues who have joined, but once they do, we'll obviously give them some time. Before starting, I want to review our testimony guidelines for our public witnesses. Witnesses representing an organization have 5 minutes to speak, and the witnesses representing their own behalf have 3 minutes to speak. Please be conscientious of your time. I will give you a nudge when your time expires, as we do have over 40 public witnesses today. And with that, I will call up the first panel of witnesses. I'm going to call in groups of 7. For those of you who haven't done hearings with the council before, you will need to affirmatively accept our invitation to be elevated as a panelist. So we'll have Dr. Judith Mounty, as a public witness, Conchetta Pucci as a public witness, Mary Washington, who is a Maryland State Senator, Karina Villa, who's an Illinois State Senator, Amanda Beal, Commissioner for ANC 8C08, Joyce Doyle, Commissioner for ANC 8C02, and Jasmine Thompson, who is a public witness. While those folks are coming in, we actually have just been joined by Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember White, if you have opening remarks, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Henderson. I really want to thank you for holding this hearing and for all the witnesses who have come to testify on this bill, which I introduced at the recommendation of several social workers. We'll hear today diverse perspectives, and I'm glad that we will. This bill aims to remove the test requirement for 2 levels of social workers in our city. As we consider this bill, we have to ground ourselves in a fact that I think we all agree on. Our situation in Washington, D.C. is dire, with pressing issues demanding our urgent and immediate attention. We are facing a crisis in mental health supports for our children, with 100 open behavioral health positions in schools alone that urgently need social workers. Homelessness persists, with people who have been approved for housing vouchers left unhoused for years due to a shortage of social worker positions in part. The demand for mental health care is surging. That's a good thing, but our professionals are stretched thin, leaving people who are seeking and needing services left out. I want us to consider some crucial points. One, we're not talking about people trying to parachute into a profession. We're talking about people with years of education and supervision. Licensed social work associates and licensed graduate social workers for whom we propose removing the exam undergo extensive training. Licensed social work associates have earned a bachelor's of social work, so a 4-year program, and 400 hours of supervised field experience. And for the entirety of their profession, no matter how long they practice, must be supervised by higher level social workers and are subject to the same ethics regulations. Licensed graduate social workers require more. They have an additional 2 years of study, a minimum 900 hours of supervised instruction, and for the entirety of their profession, no matter how long they practice, must be supervised by higher level social workers. Second, this is not unprecedented. We're not pioneering this path. Other states have recognized the flawed nature of this exam and has eliminated them. We can learn from their experiences. 3, licensed professionals who did not take this exam are already working in the field. Many dedicated social workers are already in the field, having entered before the exam requirement was in place or in states that don't mandate it, and their competence and dedication, to my knowledge, have not been questioned. 4, the quality of service, which is important. Removing the exam does not compromise the quality of services. The emphasis remains on education, supervised practice, and oversight. To allow an exam with a known significant bias to trump these standards defies logic and basic notions of equity. 5th, the bias in the exam. The social work licensing exam has extreme racial bias, not subtle, not minimal, extreme in the outcomes, a point that has been well researched. This means that talented and capable people are unfairly excluded from this profession, perpetuating inequality in access to opportunities and a disparity in access to social workers with shared life experiences for people of color. This bill is not a hasty decision. It is a calculated step toward addressing the issues of children's mental health, homelessness, the availability of social workers of color. We are not removing licensure, we're removing a barrier. Our goal is not to compromise the professionalism of social workers, but to open up the pipeline for more qualified mental health professionals. Very important, the test's effectiveness is questionable at best. There is no solid evidence that the current exam ensures safety or competence. Why should a test with no proven correlation hold back qualified professionals? We know other states are moving in this direction. The quality of services will not decline, and we will address workforce challenges. I want to clarify that we are not proposing to change requirements for higher level social workers, and we are proposing a task force to determine competency for those levels. This bill is about taking an evidence-based approach to our immediate challenges. It also rectifies a systemic bias in the social work profession. It's about giving deserving people an opportunity to contribute to our community's well-being. It's about recognizing that extensive education and supervision already ensure the competence of licensed social work associates and licensed graduate social workers. This bill is a thoughtful, responsible, and equitable response to the pressing issues we face in DC. It's an opportunity to rectify biases, diversify our profession, and ensure a brighter future for our residents. Thank you to the committee for considering this bill. Thank you to all of our public witnesses and our agency who have come to testify today. Thank you, Chairperson Henderson.
Thank you, Councilmember White. All right, we will start with Judith Mounty.
Hello there and good morning. And thank you for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. My name is Judy Mounty, and I am a licensed clinical social worker in DC. providing services to those who are deaf and hard of hearing. And I am here to support the Social Worker License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. Social workers should not be required to get a test for a license that is not equatable to competency and supervision. There is no proof or correlation that proves this fact. I graduated about 22 and worked for 22 years until I retired. My various roles from Gallaudet University included teaching social work courses in our fully accredited graduate and undergraduate programs, overseeing our students, placed in internships in DC agencies and schools, focusing both on deaf agencies and those serving a wide range of other populations. Our students are very successful in their work, yet few of them will take and pass the Association of Social Work Board's licensing examination. As a result, deaf and hard of hearing DC residents who need services are deprived of accessible and culturally congruent providers. Earlier in my professional career, with a doctorate of psycholinguistics and a background in deaf education, I was a research scientist for the Educational Testing Services in Princeton, New Jersey. In this role, I studied barriers that standardized testing, especially licensing and certification tests, present for my population. Research on other tests has shown that test scores do not align with performance. I've been trying to work with the association on this issue as it pertains to deaf and hard of hearing social workers for nearly 30 years. I'm not aware of any research undertaken by the association with our population. It is also unclear whether recommendations that have been made by myself and others to improve the clarity of tests have been adopted. Suggestions to consider multiple measures or alternative assessment approaches have not been heeded, to my knowledge. Many high-achieving deaf social work graduates of diverse ethnicity and other identity groups have thus been barred in their chosen field in DC and elsewhere. And again, this is a horrific waste of human potential. And at the end is a result that our deaf and hard of hearing population suffers from a complete lack of care and service by qualified providers. And once again, I support the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Conchetta Pucci?
Hello. Do we mind, is there any way that we could put the camera on me? You know, I wasn't able to see Judy. Is there any way to spotlight me? Anyways, my name is Dr. Connie Pucci, and I work with I'm the director of undergraduate field of education at Gallaudet. Hold on one second for me. Hold on one second. Sorry, thank you. So yes, I work at Gallaudet University as the field director, and I'm also a teacher for the social work program here at Gallaudet. I work with internships. I also work as a therapist, and I have done that for several years in order to earn my hours. I finally have achieved the hours that I need to, and I've been studying for my licensing exam. Unfortunately, it took me over 20 years to get to where I am today. And the reason that it has taken so long is because of the licensing. Because I have a deafblind disability, I have struggled to pass the exam, the licensing exam. And I do have a bit of a timeline for what has occurred in this progression. I went to New York University and got my MSW, the Master's of Social Work, and I worked in a school in New York. While I was there employed, they gave me a condition that I had to agree to a certain timeline in order to become licensed at the master's level. I accepted those conditions when I accepted that job. I studied for the test, and I studied for the Association of Social Work Boards licensing test. Unfortunately, I failed only by a few points, and I failed it 5 times. I was so close to passing each time. However, I had an issue because I was working and my job was at risk. It really affected my mental health and I was struggling. But I kept going. I kept going through the test again and again, and I kept failing. And then the last time I applied for a temporary revisional, but I was denied because I had failed the test. So they did not give me a temporary license. So I was very frustrated. So I tried to figure out how I could keep my job. I found a loophole. So New York State's teacher's certification, if I earned that, then I was able to continue working and to stay in my job. So I went through that process, but it was still very frustrating for me at that time. And at New York State, I did have accommodations for my exam, such as extended time. I was in a private room. I also had interpreters. However, the interpreters were only allowed during the vocal explanation of the test. When I moved to DC, I got my PhD. I just felt like I was hitting all these barriers. And so I continued and got my PhD, graduated from college. But I kept feeling in the back of my mind that I really wanted to get my license. So I went ahead and I studied for the exam again. There had been a 10-year gap where I had not practiced social work during this time. So can you imagine, for 10 years, there was this gap. So finally I studied and I took the test and I passed because my accommodations were different compared to the previous time that I took it. I was able to have the same accommodations with the exception that the interpreters were allowed to stay and interpret questions. They had multiple choice on the licensing exam. So for example, if I would get stuck between 2 possible answers and one of the answers might be fully correct while the other one might have one thing that's a little bit off and not the best choice. And so my issue has always been I picked the wrong one because I've been having issues with that because of the English. English is not my first language. ASL is my first and native language. So when I was able to use the ASL interpreters, then I was able to understand the questions fully and pick the correct answer. You know, and this was very traumatizing for me to go through all these tests over and over again. And so now, you know, I'm very nervous to have to take the clinical licensing test again. I don't know if I'll pass or not, just because of the trauma that I've had to live through taking it over and over again. But unfortunately, it really is, there's the disparity between people of color, Indigenous individuals, disabilities. It has taken me over 20 years to get to where I am, and I could have saved those 20 years. We need more resources for deaf people. So that is why I support this bill. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Senator Washington.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. First of all, I want to thank Chair Henderson and all the esteemed members of the Committee on Health, and thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. I am State Senator Mary Washington. I serve the 43rd District. I represent a portion of Baltimore City. I am a member of the Senate Committee on Education, Energy, and the Environment. And I've been a public servant for 13 years, and of course, like many of you, dedicated to social justice. I want to thank Councilman Robert Wright and all the co-sponsors for discussing and engaging this important issue with your constituents, the practitioners, colleagues, and your peers. This is an issue that is critical to the public health of our communities. About this time last year, I was approached by a friend who is a licensed clinical social worker and a member of an organization. They call themselves SWARE, and they are social workers for equity and anti-racism. And they've been working on a number of issues, as have others. And specifically, she reached out about the 2022 report that was showing that there were very clear, as the councilman said in his opening remarks, disparities in passage rates, race, but also immigrant status, language, as was cited, ability, and interestingly, age. So I introduced the social work licensure examination moratorium. And I wanted to also, as a part of that bill, create an alternative pathway. As happens in this process, the bill was amended to create a work group and also to begin to look at a number of issues. And although we've yet to support eliminating the exam requirement for social work licensure, I do believe that we're going to work really hard and be able to, as you intend to do in this bill, work through the work group and recommend some alternative pathways. I'm really honored and proud that we've made some accomplishments, but the fact and that this is progress. However, it doesn't address the problem. It doesn't address the fact that there are thousands of social workers in Maryland, and I would say the greater DC area, that remained unlicensed and unable to advance in their careers, despite their ability to perform well. And our community suffers for it. As policymakers, we fail those in need of social workers if we continue to allow this to continue. We fail to address the needs of individuals in our mental health care system, and we cannot allow unjust and unnecessary barriers to keep otherwise qualified professionals from getting work and advancing in their careers. The ASW licensure exam is one of those barriers. As you will likely hear, and you've heard throughout today's testimony, the exam essentially gives the ASW veto power over our institutions of higher education and graduate education. It has a veto over their determination that these individuals are otherwise qualified to perform the duties, and its veto over the licensure process. It's not a proportion of the qualifications. It can say no. The exam did not become a standard requirement until 1999. And part of the reason for this relatively later starting date for national requirements compared to nursing is that it has been a contested space from the very beginning. Organizations like the Association of Black Social Workers expressed concerns that exam-based licensure would create a hierarchy that would leave marginalized people behind. And their concerns have been proven valid. The data shows that Black and Latinx social workers nationwide pass the exam at significantly lower rates than white social workers. The ASWB, of course, blames this disparity on structural oppression, or I've even seen them blaming it on the quality of the social work institutions, training institutions themselves. In that case, they should recognize that standardized testing is historically mired in racism, and that students of colors disproportionately score lower than white students. So they cannot blame structural oppression while engaging in it. This flawed exam does not effectively assess someone's ability to be ethical. The questions are subjective. They force the test taker to choose a presumed best answer. But many social workers will tell you that often the best answer depends on the factors that you can't capture in a multiple choice exam, and that sometimes the answer is, it depends. Research has also showed that there are microaggressions in the exam itself and coded language embedded in the test questions that make the test takers of colors either choose a response that is antithetical to what they know is needed in their communities in order to pass the exam, or they themselves are traumatized. Removing the exam as a requirement it will allow social workers and hundreds of eager and otherwise qualified to start serving the DC and the greater DC area in Maryland. In time, I hope both the District of Columbia and Maryland eliminate exam-based licensures at all levels and instead establish ethical pathways to make it possible for anyone to attain the qualifications needed to become a licensed social worker. Our communities deserve more diverse and representative social workers. Our social workers deserve a fair and equitable assessment of their training and skills. I respectfully urge a favorable report on the Social Work Licensing Modernization Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Villa.
Good morning, Chair Member Henderson and members of the committee. My name is Karina Villa. I am the Illinois State Senator of the 25th District. Previously, I was a school social worker in Illinois for 15 years. In 2021, Lindsay LaPointe and I passed Senate Bill 1632, which removed a provision requiring a person to pass an exam as authorized by the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation to be a licensed social worker. Illinois now has thousands of social workers with LSWs, and we have not received any complaints as a result. We have, however, received numerous calls of gratitude from organizations and individuals who have been able to increase their workforce and be licensed as a result of this law. Recently, Illinois State Representative LaPointe and I continued our work to address the bias social workers of color are experiencing with the exam, and we passed House Bill 2365 in Illinois, which provides an alternative path to licensure for the clinical exam requirement for licensed clinical social work. The social work profession is one founded on and guided by ethical principles and standards, which help guide our practice as clinicians and fundamentally protect the people that we serve, which is why I was compelled to enact change when I saw the data collected by the Association of Social Work Boards, or the ASWB, that showed the clinical exam was biased against people of color, older adults, and people with disabilities. As a way to address these disparities, the most recent bill that we passed in Illinois does two things. It keeps the current path to licensing, which is having received a master's in and graduated from an accredited school of social work, 3,000 hours of supervision in addition to the 1-year internship from someone who has a clinical social work license, as well as passing the ASW exam. And our bill creates an alternative path, which is basically the same first part, which is the master's level graduation from an accredited school of social work, 3,000 hours of supervision from an LCSW, having taken the test in the last 5 years and failed it, or moving forward after the bill goes into effect, taking the test, failing it, and completing an additional 3,000 hours of supervision from an LCSW. I have heard from countless social work graduates who are fully competent, having completed a master's degree and intense clinical supervision hours, but have been barred from filling our mental health needs in Illinois because of a test that is failing them. By creating an alternative pathway to social work licensure, you are creating an opportunity to open the door for social workers from all walks of life to reflect the diverse communities that they are trying to serve. With the need for more mental health professionals right now, I also want to raise the very real harm by not acting, as all constituents deserve a diverse social work workforce to address the critical mental health needs. I commend the work of Councilman White and the work that he is doing for the District of Columbia. with this movement of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. The Social Work Code of Ethics requires us as a profession to act, and that we can only live out our values if we are truly willing to address the difficult and very real inequities within our own profession, which is why I am here testifying today. I urge you to support Councilmember White's Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Beal? I don't see Commissioner Beal. Commissioner Doyle?
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Commissioner Joy Doyle. I'm the Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for the Single Member District of HC02 here in Ward 8 in the Congress Heights neighborhood. I come to you today not only as an ANC commissioner, but also as a clinically licensed speech language pathologist who share some of the same concerns that I've had around test taking, but also understand the experience of a woman of color in these professional healthcare spaces that were never designed for people that look like me. These professions, at least the profession that I'm in, began for targeting the middle-class white American woman. And so as we've progressed over time, speech pathologists only make up 8% of the therapists in that field. I'm concerned about the future of the social workers workforce. I'm concerned that this bill does not address the issues of organizational workplace culture. It does not consider or put resources around compassion fatigue, burnout, all of these things that affect the individual human being who is also called a social worker. It is also, in the tone of this bill, also is this expectation to fix and not treat the problem. We as therapists do not fix people, we treat people, but we also need to work for organizations that are going to invest in their workforce. I am concerned about things such as pay equities moving forward. Women-dominated fields, as we know, do not receive pay equities in general. And when you have professions such as the information technology space where you can get a certification with a high school diploma and make as much as a teacher or a social worker or a speech pathologist in many cases, we have a real problem in this country. I am also concerned with the fact that I have not heard any comment from the Office of Risk Management. What does this look like for small business owners? Will there be an increased business cost for insurance to be able to hire non-licensed social workers? I haven't heard anything about this. I also haven't heard of any conversation between Medicaid and Medicare. As an Afro-Irish American, I come to this conversation not just as somebody with experience in healthcare, but also somebody that has a unique experience across race, class, and culture. And I'm concerned about the business owners who would be doing this social work, at these bigger companies that would have great potential for billable rates, but these may not possibly be businesses of color. What happens when we move to the space of having bodies in the seat, where people are actually having an opportunity to work, to do this work, but they can't find a pathway out? Social work goes beyond Washington, D.C. And as you're driving across 295 and saying, looking at the landscape of Maryland and Virginia, you cannot go work over there if you are experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue for the clients. And so if we are not well as therapists, then how can our patients be well? So I argue that looking at this bill needs an organizational lens. We need to start doing workplace culture assessments for our social workers. We need to figure out why people are leaving in droves. We need to look at the internal factors versus hiring people. And when we as people of color absolutely need this ticket, this licensure to be able to thrive in these spaces outside of this area, if this bill is passed, this becomes another equity barrier. it becomes another equity barrier because we are not going to be able to grow outside of these spaces. I would like to know why there wasn't any consideration to put funding into creating a state-of-the-art test-taking cohort where we hire people that haven't passed this social work exam, we provide them this test-taking cohort, and then they commit to 5 years. Will that reduce workplace turnover? What is the cost of the turnover rate in 10 years? And do you really feel that you have enough data to look at how these other states who are removing these this licensure requirements, what is the data really saying? Has it been enough time to really give a clear, honest assessment of that data interpretation? So as a person of color in this space, I'm opposed to this bill because I feel like we need to do work with all of our other senators and congresspeople across the country. We need to work on ways to dismantle these institution-like associations who are keeping these barriers in place. And if we can get players in the game that can say, you know what, my state doesn't need to do this at the very top, then now those funding or associations like ASHA or the social work associations, now they're going to lose their power because this is not a barrier of requirement. So yes, the need for social workers is great in this city. And yes, the problem has been there and it's just exacerbated out of COVID. And yes, our families of color in our most underserved and disadvantaged communities are suffering. And yes, these biases are real. They are real. And all tests are biased. But if we don't start to understand that these test-taking strategies are really a privilege in our education experience, then we're probably not starting at the right place for some of this. So I ask you to reconsider passing this bill and really looking internally into the organizational practices that are maybe not taking care of our social workers as to why they're leaving. I'm asking all of the social workers in the future who decide to take the deal to come in, to think of the Hotel California, that you might be able to come in, but you may never be able to leave. We need our senators and we need our congresspeople to work across the country to either decide to remove it in total, or to say that we cannot risk as persons of color, as healthcare providers, to not have our licensure because we cannot fairly compete in these spaces that weren't designed for us. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see Jasmine Thompson here. So we're going to do a 7-minute round of questions. Excuse me, particularly for this panel. I want to thank all of the witnesses for their testimony. And I do have a few questions. Senator Villa, I appreciate you being here today. I think you have a certain level of expertise here because you guys have already passed this legislation. So you kind of have seen sort of the impact of what has been happening in Illinois. I'm curious, has there been a situation where organizations have sort of bifurcated, oh, you're licensed with the exam versus, oh, you're licensed without the exam? So for like some sort of special denotation, if you will, or is it just everyone has the exam or everyone is licensed and that's it?
That was in fact one of the things that Representative LaPointe, who also is a social worker, by the way, her and I worked tirelessly to make sure that we would not have a scarlet letter. The folks who passed the test got a license, and with this new pathway, they will still have the same license. It will not be a license with a scarlet letter.
Okay, but an employer is not precluded from the ability to ask an applicant whether or not they've passed the exam, correct?
So that is correct. But what we did have organizations that represent hundreds of social workers throughout the state who were really on board with this legislation because they are desperate to bring social workers, licensed clinical social workers on board. In fact, folks that have been working at those agencies for many, many years who have been unsuccessful at passing the bias test, they were totally on board with our legislation.
Okay. And I want to ask about the alternative pathway, because that was something else that, or at least I had been thinking about of, okay, if there's not an exam, is there something else that we can do? Very similar to how some undergrad universities have been moving away from just solely relying on the SAT to other alternative ways of determining someone's candidacy to see if they're going to be a good fit or successful fit at their university. But in the process of sort of researching about this bill, to be honest, I didn't realize that candidates had to pay for supervision hours. And so was there no concerns raised that by saying, okay, you don't have to take in lieu of the exam, you just need 3,000 more additional hours of supervision? Is that not a barrier that could potentially be an equity issue because you have to pay?
I appreciate the question, and you identified something that, as you know, Councilwoman, we have to sometimes swallow big pills when we're trying to pass legislation.
Right.
And this was a tough pill to swallow because we did not want the additional hours.
Okay.
But this was a negotiated way for us to get the bill across the finish line. As you know, yes, a master's level social worker has to do an entire year, aside from their classes, their classwork. They have to do an entire year of unpaid internship for one entire year. And then they have to graduate. And then they have to pay for this test that we know is biased. The numbers speak for themselves. 44% of African Americans pass the clinical exam on the first attempt, with only 57% eventually passing. So these folks are taking the test, they're paying to take the test over and over again and failing it. So we did not want this to have this economic burden and strain on folks, but it was a way for us to get the bill passed.
Got it. Okay. Senator Washington, I appreciate you again being here as well. And, when the legislation was introduced in Maryland, I was kind of paying attention just to kind of see what would happen there. How is the work group going? Have you guys already started conversations? Senator Washington, are you still with us? If you're speaking, you're on mute. Okay. Okay, she might have stepped away. So I want to turn to Dr. Monty. You mentioned in your testimony that only few students who are in the social work program at Gallaudet actually take the exam. Why is that?
So there are reasons why when taking the test, it really has become impossible. They're afraid to take the test and looking for work for people who are deaf, for students who are deaf. They could be incredibly skilled, but having to require that license for this profession. Sometimes they aren't able to find an equitable job with the degree that they have.
Okay.
So they just become assistants. And even though they may be skilled, they're afraid of taking this test and just constantly failing.
Got it.
So
okay.
That has become part of the issue, is the English portion of it.
Understood. Okay. I've had several meetings with individuals around this exam, and in my last 20 seconds, I'll just be honest. So, lots of our professional exams, particularly in the health space, all require examination. And nursing,
Correct.
medicine, dentistry, you name it. I mean, even if you think about outside of even the health space, even in law, for instance. And so if we look closely at the pass rates of some of those examinations, you might see the same similar disparities. And yet no one is calling for there not to be a bar exam. No one is calling for nursing not to have their particular exam as well. But I know that specifically, if you look deeper at the pass rates at particular institutions, some schools have figured it out and some schools have sort of struggled with it, if you will. But there were also individuals who said that they went through their social work program and they never knew that they had to take an exam at the end of their coursework. And so I was just trying to understand a little bit more about what was happening at Cal UW. But I am over my time. Councilmember White, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to this panel of witnesses. As I started researching with my colleague Katie Whitehouse this bill and working on this bill, talking to social workers, and even hearing some of the testimonies today, to understand the years of training that it takes to become a social worker, the cost for supervised hours for the exam, compared to the pay in the field. I am grateful that people want to make the sacrifice to do such important work. And I'm glad that this is a space that we are paying attention, even if everyone doesn't agree on this particular bill. I'm grateful to people who are in and trying to be in this profession, because it does take a special person. Senator Villa, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Since the bill in Illinois is passed, have you heard any concerns that maybe an increased number of social workers at the first two levels have caused an issue with the supervision requirements, because these two levels are required to be supervised by higher level social workers? Have you heard concerns that there are too many social workers in the field and not enough people to supervise them?
Thank you for the question. No, we have not heard that concern. In fact, currently, social workers who have not been able to pass the exam are working in agencies under licensed clinical social workers. So this is already something that is happening. They just when we passed the legislation, they didn't have this alternate path.
And how long, I think you said this, and I apologize, I missed it. How long has it been since Illinois ended the exam requirement for the bachelor's and master levels of licensure?
Yes, we passed that first bill in 2021. And immediately about 3,000, within the first few months, about 3,000 social workers were able to obtain their LSW.
That's incredible. And you spoke to some of this in your testimony. You mentioned that there have not been any complaints about newly licensed social workers. So it sounds like things are going. Anything else you want to add to help us understand how things have been going with these two levels of social workers since you passed the bill in 21?
I think that just to continue to reiterate, social workers of color, we have known that there has been a bias in the exam, but this, we've been asking for these statistics. We've been wanting ASWB to let us know what we already know as a community about this exam. ASWB has had this information. They have known that this test is in fact biased. When the information came out and came to light, I agree with the member who spoke earlier. This should be something that is happening across the country when there is this huge disparity between people of color and people who are Caucasian. the test rate passing, action needs to be taken. So there's questions as what about these other professions, et cetera. And my answer to that is, if not social workers, then who? We are the helping profession. So I appreciate all of you for your consideration, and I seriously urge an I vote.
Thank you so much, Senator. And Dr. Mounty, what was your experience like taking the exam?
Yes. So in my own experience taking that exam, that's what you're asking me about.
Yes.
So I worked in another profession. I have a PhD prior to becoming a social worker. And I became a licensed at the graduate level in 2004. And then, when the pandemic happened, I started working in that area, and we had an endorsement. I guess the language is my field. I have a PhD in psycholinguistics. I was hard of hearing, so my hearing started to deteriorate, but language is my thing. So when I was able to take the test, I was able to figure out and decipher the English. But unfortunately, not everyone has that experience with and comfort with English. So I did request to have extended time. I had time and a half as an accommodation. And with the first test, I did have extended time. And they've had that for a long time. And that, I took some tests even before the ADA came into being. But I was able to easily pass the exam, just like because it's a standardized test. But the reason why I was able to pass is due to that extended time. It gave me time to write the English and to figure out what I wanted to say. I'm not a hearing person. I can't hear very much, but I had to sit and think about what sounded right and then pick that answer. As opposed to someone who's a native speaker of the language. So I was able to look over the different multiple choice questions and figure out which ones were wrong and narrow it down that way. But it wasn't, I base everything based on something other than hearing the language. So my experience with it is very different. Some people, they hear the language and they're able to pick it up easier. People that speak first and able to read, but for deaf people, hard of hearing people, we have to approach it very differently. So that was just kind of my experience. The extended time really was helpful. And so I did, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Monty. I'm over time. There were a couple more points I wanted to touch on, but we have more panels, so I think we'll have an opportunity to touch on them. So let me again thank all the members of this panel. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the witnesses. As Councilmember White said, we do have quite a lengthy list to get through, so we're going to go on to the next panel. For those of you who are here, you will be put back into the witness room, and then we will call up the next panel of 7. Christy Love, President of the Association of Black Social Workers, Metro DC. Angelo Boone, Executive Director of the Consortium of Child Welfare. Christian Green. Michael Massey, who's Professor, National Catholic School of Social Work Services. Karen Cunningham, Executive Director of Everyone Home DC. Karen Ostely, Senior Director of Behavioral Health Transition at Catholic Charities, and Christy Respress from Pathways. I believe that is 7. And I see Christy Love. So Christy, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Hey, good morning. Hold on just a minute, sorry. All right. First, Councilwoman Henderson, I just want to say the work group for Maryland hasn't started. I know Senator Mary Washington wasn't able to answer your question, but they have not started. They're still working on it. Still working on starting. Okay. Good morning. I am Christy Love, President of the Association of Black Social Workers, Metro DC Chapter. Thank you, Council Member Henderson, the Committee on Health, and Council Member Robert White, who introduced the bill. On behalf of the National Association of Black Social Workers, know that I regard as my primary obligation the welfare of the Black individual, Black family, and Black community, and will engage in action for improving social conditions. I give precedence to this mission over my personal interests. I am in support of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023, with particular attention to exempt associate and graduate social workers from examination for licensure, and to form a task force to identify an assessment method for independent social work licensure. In addition to the exemption of the exam, we would like to add that the task force includes a designated member of the National Association of Black Social Workers, Metro DC Chapter. The exam should remain an option for those who desire to take it, but we have to consider other pathways to clinical licensure. We cannot dismiss the statistical findings that ASWB released in 2022. Supporting this bill is a starting point to a larger conversation that addresses ASWB's tactics of harmful gatekeeping. ASWB's statistical evidence is clear, yet it's unclear how they plan to address these findings. As Black social workers, we cannot move in an individualistic world. I charge us to practice living out the principles of Nguzo Saba with great attention to unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, and creativity. This profession is not a one-size-fits-all, yet we refuse to be creative on how a professional social worker can reach the clinical level. This bill eliminates a barrier. Social workers are change agents that assist individuals to decrease barriers. The exam has become a barrier to a social worker's professional and personal growth. ABSW Metro DC Chapter supports this bill because it removes unnecessary barriers to social workers. We do not want to minimize our professionalism. We want to provide an equal opportunity to all social workers who have studied and completed a CSWE accredited MSW program in order to work in DC around the areas of housing, schools, behavioral health, community-based organizations, and mental health. We are advocating to be included on the task force that will fight for social justice within the social work profession. We believe ASWB should take responsibility and be held accountable for their racist and harmful gatekeeping tactics that have impacted Black and Brown people. We support this bill with amendments in mind that provide additional pathways to licensure. Please consider passing the bill to ensure DC residents are served and DC social workers can provide services. Asante Sana, thank you.
Thank you. Angela Boone. Okay. I don't see Christian Green. Michael Massey. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chairperson Henderson and the committee members. I am Mike Massey. and I'm an assistant professor of social work at Catholic University, and my testimony represents my individual views. I'm urging you to fully support this bill as currently written. I've been studying this issue for several years, and I can tell you that the evidence clearly shows this to be a safe, effective, common sense policy that will immediately increase and diversify DC's social work workforce, mitigating decades of harm caused by the exam. So people defending these exams claim they protect the public, but the claim has no basis in reality or in data. What the data does overwhelmingly show is that the exams are a machine of inequality and racial stratification. Year after year, well-prepared and competent Black and Brown, older and other social work graduates are delayed in practicing or completely cut off out from the profession based solely on these exams. Over the 10-year period of exam outcome data we have, nearly 500 social workers of color have been impacted in DC alone. More devastating is that DC communities needing good social workers are being denied service. This does not protect the public. So some may think that the bill is an attempt to lower standards because of outcome disparities, but this is based on the false presumption that the exam is a standard of social work competence. But in truth, after 40 years of testing, no evidence, and I mean none, supports this claim. On the other hand, there is significant research that raises serious questions about the exam's validity. Given this reality, the National Association of Social Workers concluded that they could not support this exam's, quote, unnecessary gatekeeping and discrimination because it, quote, does not conform with industry testing standards. Further, there is no evidence that the exam ensures competence or prevents misconduct or unethical practice, unquote. This could not be any clearer. Importantly, about 25% of the 50 states do not use the bachelor or master's exams as a barrier to social work, and many haven't used them for years with no public safety issues. As you heard, Illinois eliminated the master's exams in 2021 with no public safety issues. Other states have responded. In 2023, Utah, Rhode Island, and Connecticut passed similar bills, and more states are likely to follow. As a social work professor in DC, I've seen excellent students graduate and then stagnate as they're denied jobs and opportunity. They clearly demonstrated readiness for the difficult and nuanced demands of social work in their classes and in their hundreds of hours of required supervised field work. Many of these students, who are mostly Black, want to serve people with a shared culture and background of their own communities. Yet, a multiple choice exam, unsupported by evidence, bars them from doing so. And we're all lesser for it. The proposed bill eliminates the needless and redundant bachelor's and master's level exams and sets up a task force to seek fair and meaningful alternative standards for independent licensure. It's an easy, safe, and effective way of starting to address our social services and mental health workforce shortage and righting a wrong that has harmed our communities for far, far too long. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Karen Cunningham.
Good morning, Chairperson Henderson and members
morning.
of the Committee on Health. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Karen Cunningham, and I am a Ward 1 voter and Executive Director of Everyone Home DC. Founded in 1967, Everyone Home DC's mission is to support the holistic needs of individuals and families at risk of or experiencing homelessness in the district. I'm testifying today in enthusiastic support of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. Today, you will hear important and compelling testimony from my colleagues about how social work licensing exams have no correlation with competence and how they are preventing qualified BIPOC, older, deaf, and non-native English-speaking social workers from working in the field. I will focus on how passing this legislation is a vital step towards ending homelessness in the district. The passage of the legislation will immediately increase the number of qualified licensed graduate social workers in the district. This increase of highly qualified licensed social workers will advance the mission of Everyone Home DC by enabling us to build our team from a larger pool of talented and diverse licensed social workers and will quickly increase our capacity to help our clients achieve safe and stable housing. Everyone Home DC prioritizes hiring people with social work degrees as the tenets of social work align with the values of our organization. Social workers are trained to understand and develop solutions through both micro and macro frameworks. They build strong and healthy relationships through empathic and active listening, approach their work from a person-centered and strengths-based perspective, possess strong critical thinking and problem-solving skills, and are adept at maintaining healthy boundaries. Something particularly important in our line of work is the ability to contextualize individual challenges within larger systems of oppression, because we know that homelessness is the result of broken systems. Social workers are not only well suited for this work, but licensed social workers are essential to our ability to end homelessness, and I'll explain why. Everyone Home DC was thrilled with the district's necessary and significant increase in funding to the city's permanent supportive housing program in the FY22 and FY23 budgets. To help implement these resources, Everyone Home DC eagerly entered into a human care agreement with the Department of Human Services to provide permanent supportive housing for single adults and families. This iteration of PSH is funded through Medicaid, which requires us to have a licensed independent clinical social worker on our team in order to bill for services. Our organization must therefore build a pipeline of licensed social workers to maintain a deep bench of LICSWs to continue doing this life-changing work. Increasing the number of PSH case managers who are also LGSWs and further honing their social work skills so they can progress to becoming LICSWs is necessary for the health of our program and the health of the district's PSH program as a whole. As it stands now, when hiring and choosing between candidates with social work degrees, we're forced to hire the licensed candidate, even if they are less experienced, less qualified, and less passionate about ending homelessness. This also means that we are more likely to hire white candidates over people of color because so many social workers of color are excluded from licensure by a biased exam. It is our firm belief that removing the exam will enhance our workforce and increase the quality of work provided by our organization and other social services, behavioral health, educational, and mission-driven organizations across the city. While I'm a big fan of social workers, I am not one. I'm a lawyer. And it strikes me that you can graduate from law school, pass the bar, and start practicing law without any actual relevant work experience. And once licensed, there is no ongoing supervision requirement, nor does the district require ongoing legal education. In contrast, a social worker must have over 1,000 hours of supervised field work in order to graduate with an MSW, be supervised by a more experienced social worker with a higher level of licensure, and receive continuing education credits every year in order to practice in the district. Social workers are required to be more prepared for and are more supported in their early practice years than lawyers. The licensing exam adds nothing but an arbitrary barrier that excludes diverse and highly qualified social workers from doing the work our city and our most marginalized residents so desperately need them to do. DC should be excited to be at the forefront of implementing a new pathway to licensure for social workers and put justice into action. It is our belief that this will happen in DC and across the country. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We urge you to blaze this trail and pass the Social Work License Modernization Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Ostley.
Good morning, Chair Henderson and members of the Committee on Health. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council today. My name is Karen Ostley. I'm a Senior Director at Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington in our behavioral health programs. I'm also a licensed independent clinical social worker and resident of Ward 6. Catholic Charities provides a full continuum of behavioral health services to meet the whole health needs of DC's most vulnerable adults and children. Our services include outpatient mental health services through our freestanding mental health clinic, a full range of core services, assertive community treatment, school-based mental health, and children and adolescent mobile psychiatric services known as CHAMPS. I request your support of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. This is an important bill to bring needed reform to the social work licensing process. I know all of you are acutely aware of the staffing crisis in behavioral health programs across the city. And the district and the current licensure exam requirements are keeping us from hiring qualified and competent LSWA and LGSW level social workers to fill critical positions. I'm also looking forward to the task force recommendations for the LICSW and LISW level licenses. In the 40 years of existence, the social work licensing exams have never been correlated with safe and competent social work practice. And in fact, the data shows they actively discriminate against BIPOC, older, non-native English speaking, and deaf social workers. Eliminating exam requirements would not be lowering standards. It would be acknowledging the false standards that are reinforcing racial discrimination and shortchanging our communities. It's also important to acknowledge, even without exams, social workers have a high bar for licensure. They must graduate from an accredited school of social work, obtain 1,000 hours of closely supervised practice, fulfill continuing education requirements, and get a criminal background check. Taken together, that is more than an adequate baseline of training and competence. In my almost 20 years with Catholic Charities, I have directly witnessed the impact of the exam requirement on our ability to hire and retain social workers, and it's contributing to the staffing crisis in our city. We haven't been open to new intakes or referrals for some of our programs because we haven't been able to hire and retain sufficient staff to provide the services. We know there are children who are put on waiting lists for therapy in the schools because we haven't been able to fill vacancies. We also know there are qualified candidates with social work degrees to work in our programs and provide community-based services. But our hands are tied if they haven't been able to get licensed because of the racially biased ASWB exam. I've personally supervised individuals who worked in our programs, went back to school to earn a master's in social work to advance their knowledge to better serve our clients, but have been forced to leave because they haven't passed the exam and then can't work without a social work license. These have been some of our best staff as they demonstrated they have the desire, experience, and education and come directly from the communities of the people we serve. Who better to make a positive impact in the lives of our clients? Our social work code of ethics calls on us to challenge social injustice and work to dismantle systems that continue to oppress individuals and groups. Advocating to eliminate the biased ASWB exam from a licensing requirement embodies this core value and principle of our social work code of ethics. To close, I urge you once again to support the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Karen. I will have some questions. Christy?
Hi, good morning, Councilmember Henderson. Thank you for having me, and council members and staff. My name is Christy Respress. I'm the president and CEO of Pathways to Housing DC. Each year, Pathways prevents and helps end homelessness for over 3,500 people in DC and in Maryland. We do that by providing behavioral health, supportive housing, and street outreach services with our staff of over 150. I'm here today to testify in full support of the Social Work Modernization Act of 2023. I won't go over the data regarding the test because you're hearing it and you're going to hear some more from so many people about the detrimental impact this exam requirement has on bringing qualified social workers to the district. As you will hear repeatedly, there is no data linking the passing of the exam to good social work practice, but there is data showing the incredible racial, language, and age disparities of pass rates among test takers. Pathways currently employs 6 LICSWs and another half dozen LASWs and LGSWs. Our LICSWs are fully in support of this act because they know that it would bring more qualified bachelor's and master's level clinicians into our agency and that they could provide the ongoing clinical supervision needed to succeed and hopefully move on to become LICSWs themselves. Pathways relies on the whole person, strength-centered clinical expertise of social workers. One of the ways, in many ways, we employ social workers is on our behavioral health programs. We operate 2 DBH certified assertive community treatment or ACT teams. ACT is the highest level of outpatient mental health care available in the community. The service is a critical part of the behavioral health services continue in DC, and there's an incredible need to expand the program. Us, like Catholic Charities, have been closed, or Anchor, I should say, have been closed to new intakes for a very long time. We know, for example, there are people living in DHS-funded permanent supportive housing programs like ours who are in need of ACT services to help them recover from behavioral health challenges. And while we would love to grow our ACT program to meet the need, we are unable to do so because we literally cannot recruit enough staff to do this work. There's a nationwide shortage of behavioral health staff and an even greater shortage of people interested and willing to do the sacred work of community-based mental health. People come to work to Pathways because they believe in our mission. And we've had many, many applicants over the last several years apply for positions on our ACT teams who have experience in the field, but because they have a social work degree and are not licensed, we weren't even able to interview them. If we did, because they are unlicensed, our agency could be fined and our LICSW social workers would face sanctions. I want to say clearly that I'm not here today advocating to support this act just due to workforce challenges. I'm here because the test is racially biased. There is no data linking a person's ability to pass this test to good social work practice, period. I'm here testifying because this test is causing actual harm to the social workers who earn degrees from accredited universities, completed field work under the supervision of licensed social workers, and who would enter the field remaining under the supervision of licensed social workers. Dropping the ASWB exam as a requirement for licensure at the LASW and LGSW level and talking future at the LICSW level, it won't solve the workforce shortage. No one solution will, but it is one of the many levers that we can pull that would have an immediate effect. Eliminating the exam requirement would quickly bring qualified bachelor's and master's level practitioners to agencies like ours, where we could continue to invest in their ongoing professional development. You're hearing from many people today, primarily social workers, I am one, who are passionate about this legislation, both for and against. And I urge you to make decisions based on data and not feelings and fear mongering. If passed, this act will only bring more qualified social workers under clinical supervision. And isn't that what we want? There's no risk that we concede to residents of the district to license social workers at the bachelor's and master's level while working under the clinical supervision of an LICSW without the requirements of an antiquated, racist, ageist, and ableist test. There are bad apples in every field, and we will continue, as we do now, to bring any concerns about unethical social workers directly to the Social Work Board. Thank you.
Thank you. We will do a 5-minute round for this group. I want to thank you all for testifying. Christy, don't go anywhere. I want to ask you first. So one of the things that I've been hearing is, if someone has a master's of social work degree, but they haven't passed the exam or haven't been licensed, I can't hire them or I will otherwise be penalized. That can't be for all the positions that are available.
It is for all this. Yes, Councilman, the scope of social work is so wide, the scope of practice, that anything under the scope of practice, which the board could share with you, is considered social work. And so case management is social work, even though it can be done by people from any other number of disciplines. If you have a social work degree, you cannot do it unless you're licensed. So,
what if I didn't have a social work degree? Could I be hired as a case manager?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And if you were,
I don't know, I'm getting some skeptical looks from Karen and Karen.
If you were a social worker, could you be hired as a case manager is what you asked?
Right. I'm just trying to understand if I'm a caseworker, if the functions of my job are to help someone navigate the system.
Yeah. Right.
Why do I need to be a licensed social worker to accomplish that work?
You don't. You can have other degrees, but if you have your degree in social work, you must be licensed in order to practice. So for example, if you have a psychology degree or a degree in forensics or a degree in any number of helping professions, even a master's in divinity, let's say, you could do the work. And many people do. But if you are a person with a social work degree, you are considered practicing without license, which would put you and the agency hiring you and the social worker at your agency at risk of being sanctioned because you are working without a license, which is illegal under the scope of the DC Board of Social Work.
Okay. Does anyone else want to jump in on this? That was helpful.
Council. So yes, to answer your question, I think she heard your question wrong. Anybody with a degree can be a case manager, but if you are a person with a master's in social worker, they may hire you as a case manager, but eventually you're going to have the licensure. So a person with a degree in any other field can be a case manager as long as they like. But if you're a social worker, a person with a master's in social work, you have to be licensed, or your company and you will be fined.
Okay.
Yeah, and can I
Karen?
just, yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think Christy mentioned, if you have a BSW or an MSW, we can't even hire you. And that's where we've had before, I think it was, I don't know, 10, 13 years ago, where we could, and we had some people with MSWs that were working in our community support program.
Mhm.
We had to give them, and they were all happened to be Black or, they're Black or African from different African countries that had to then try to pass the exam. We gave them 6 months. They did not pass the exam, and we had to terminate their employment. So they had been working in the position because they could not pass the exam. They could not stay hired as our employee. And as Christy said, we've had people apply, especially BSWs. We get that they want to apply. They're then going to go on to get their MSW, but they can't work in those positions if they're not licensed. So
is there, yeah, there used to be a council member who would say, I throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm just trying to understand, is there a way to sort of narrowly needle this to address the issues, the very real issues that you all are raising, but also the concerns that, an earlier panelist said, oh, an exam is vetoing sort of the statement or the affirmation from a university that this person is qualified. I think we can all admit, though, not every university is made equal in terms of the quality of whatever their programming is. And so I'm trying to sort of measure this by us putting the board and the staff in a, how do you evaluate whether or not someone is endorsing someone to say you are going to provide safe and quality practice. How do you do that without an exam in this sort of licensing space? But I'm over my time. I try to practice what I preach. Councilmember White. We might come back for another round. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairperson Henderson. Let me start with Professor Massey and commend you for the fine art in your background. I like it. You mentioned in your testimony that nearly 500 social workers of color have been impacted by the exam. Can you expound on that?
Sure. And thanks for the compliment. That's my daughter Mabel did that. She also supports this bill. Yeah, so the 500 number was, we looked at the data in DC, and we looked at this was focused particularly on the racial disparities. And what we did is said, if all of the social work graduates passed at the same rates as white test takers did, that this is how many more essentially social workers we would have licensed in DC right now. And it's a massive number. That's just 10 years. So in actuality, that's only counting the racial disparities. If we look at disparities around age and ability, et cetera, we're talking more than that. So I'll answer that question. I have some responses to Councilmember Henderson, but maybe now is not the time.
So some folks have suggested that rather than eliminate the exam, we should fix it. Professor Massey, why not fix the exam?
So there's a couple answers to that. That one, an exam, and particularly a multiple choice exam, is just on its face not appropriate to be able to measure the competence of a social worker who has a very nuanced and complex job to do around, people working with people. I think the larger answer to that is that right now we have a monopoly in terms of who makes the test and who distributes and who profits largely from the test. ASWB is sitting on $30+ million in assets. They just rake in money about this with this over 40 years. And they have been, their stance has been denial and deception over the course of that 40 years. And so when we say we need to fix the exam, that puts the responsibility back in an organization that has acted unethically, irresponsibly, and has ignored the calls that have been happening since this started, right? They just, after 40 years, released demographic past data. It took them 40 years to just do that. And that was under great pressure. So this wasn't an act of generosity on their part. So we have a lot of things that social workers are doing right now in school. They're in the field while they're in school. The folks that work in agencies right now are having to fire or not hire people they know are qualified because of the exam. We don't need it for the bachelor's and master's level. Clearly, we don't need it.
I appreciate it. Let me pause you there and move to Karen Cunningham from Everyone Home DC. If this bill passes, will you have concerns or reservations about hiring social workers who are licensed under the new requirement that don't require an exam for passage?
Absolutely not. And for all of the reasons that you're hearing about, social workers already have to have a lot of supervised practice experience before they can even graduate with a master's in social work. And the licensing will still require them to be supervised by more experienced social workers with a higher level license, and they have to do continuing education credit in order to maintain their license. There are so many other more valuable ways of ensuring that social workers are performing their jobs in ways that are safe and ethical and supporting our clients. I have absolutely no reservations about that whatsoever.
Thank you. Karen, is it Ostley? Sorry.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. What challenges do you experience in hiring social workers at the bachelor's and master's levels?
Well, I think the biggest challenge at the bachelor's level is the requirement for the exam. Because I think a lot of people come in at the bachelor's level and don't even realize they need to be licensed. And then when they hear about the requirement and the cost, they decline to do it. So we can't hire them at that level. And like I said, a lot of the bachelor's level are going on to college based, so they may, going on to get their master's. And we can't hire anybody that doesn't have that license. And I just wanted to kind of address the idea that I know I've heard this, that it's the different program that people go to that may be, the issue. But I know we also have a program here at Catholic Charities where we have students at Catholic University. They do their internship. We have a donor that has provided funding to pay for their, scholarship money to pay for their coursework. And so they're getting the same education. They're doing intensive internships with us. And it's the Black and brown people that are having challenges with passing the exam. I've seen people coming out of that same program, and some have taken the test 3 times and they're not working. And it's a burden for them financially, and it's demoralizing. So I would challenge the assumption that it's the program and not the test.
I appreciate that, and I am over time. I apologize for that. Thank you so much to this panel. Thank you, Chairperson Henderson.
Thank you. I just one other question before I go into the next panel. Are you all in favor of the social work licensure compact? that isn't what we are dealing with today. I know that is something that, folks are considering, but my understanding is that to be part of the compact, you have to have the exam. And the same arguments there around this will help increase the number of individuals that we have available to us. So I'm just kind of curious. Just a thought. It hasn't been introduced here, but I'm just wondering.
I can start that. I think most social workers want more portability and transferability of their licenses. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Massey, can you speak up just to?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I think most social workers are in favor of increasing portability and transferability of their licenses across, states and localities. There is a problem that, from my standpoint, there's still some language in the compact that could be changed, but that is changeable. The other thing to keep in mind is you can still join the compact. So passing this bill would not preclude us from joining the compact. It may, based on what the compact says, it may limit certain portability for folks, but I think we'll see that changing as more states and DC recognize what's happening here, the reality that these exams are causing. So I think this is a start of something, of a way to kind of pursue the compact, but pursue it in a way that's more equitable and fair for all social workers.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys again so much for being here. And I'm sure this will be an ongoing conversation. It is a conversation that we've been having for quite some time around how do we get more folks into the social work profession. And so we'll keep talking. But thank you again for being here. We'll go on to the next panel of witnesses. Rachel Doyle, Kimberly Sims, Lisa Kays, Benita Schaller, Katrina Carter, Andrea Harrell, and Jolia Gorman. Okay, and I see Rachel here. So Rachel, why don't you go ahead and get started?
All right, thank you. 1 second. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I especially thank Councilmember White for listening to petition signers, social workers, and DC residents and putting forth this important legislation. My name is Rachel Doyle. I have worked in DC for almost 20 years, been a social worker for 12, and a supervisor for the past 6. I'm a field instructor, meaning I guide future social workers while they are in their master's program internships. This means I get to know my students and their practice very well over the course of a year. I have provided supervision to multiple talented Black social workers who then struggle to pass our licensing exams. These exams are flawed and do not measure social work competence. Many of my colleagues and I who have passed these exams assess supervisees as ready to begin their careers. We are then told that a multiple choice exam supersedes our judgment, even in a human-centered profession such as social work. It pains me to witness so much wasted talent because of this invalid, biased exam. Supervisors are much better equipped to assess social workers than an exam. It is abundantly clear that these tests do filter out social workers. However, they filter by identity rather than competence. NASW's president, Dr. Anthony Estreet, said at Catholic University's social work graduation ceremony this spring, quote, "The most powerful tools in our toolbox include respect, inclusion, empathy, dignity, collaboration, advocacy, diversity, quality, and hope." I agree with him, and I think you'll agree that none of these are measured well through a multiple choice exam. Supervision, however, both assesses and enhances these skills. I would not be here today if there were any evidence that ASWB tests did what they say they do, but there's no evidence that these exams are correlated with safe and competent practice, nor that they protect the public. ASWB has had 40 years to correct the many flaws within its exams. It is past time to stop giving them chances. I can also tell you that colloquially, the vast majority of test prep is based on two premises. One, answer the way the test wants you to answer, not the way you would actually do it. And two, answer like a Midwestern white woman would. I'd like to say I'm joking, but I have actually received feedback that this advice was helpful when I started passing it along. It is also important that you know that DC right now has many actively practicing social workers who were grandfathered and have never passed a licensing exam. There's no evidence that these social workers perform any differently than those who have. Not only do these exams not protect anyone, they are actively harming the public by keeping out talented BIPOC, older, bilingual, and deaf social workers. We are in a mental health crisis and a workforce shortage. We know the importance of having service providers reflect the diverse communities they serve, and this exam is a major barrier to that alignment of care. This bill is a giant step forward to reduce harm in DC. With your help, we can get more social workers where we belong, in our schools, hospitals, mental health clinics, healthcare centers, substance abuse treatment facilities, and social service agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimberly Sims.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kimberly Sims, and I am proud to be a licensed graduate social worker and resident of the District of Columbia. I'm also a former teacher of African American history, and what I will say today to voice my strong support of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023 will be grounded in a historical perspective. I think it's important for everyone here to know. When the ASWB released data showing that people like me, Black social workers in the District of Columbia, pass entry-level standardized licensure exams at half the rate of white social workers here, I want to be honest, I was sad, but quickly became furious. Any test that so many Black social workers in the District of Columbia cannot pass is invalid, and I'll tell you why. The requirement to take a standardized test to become a licensed social worker only dates back to the early 1980s. This implementation occurred over the objections of many Black social workers who feared the outcome we are seeing now. It is time to correct this misguided choice. Black social work excellence in the District of Columbia is a much older and deeper tradition. It goes back over 100 years to a time when white social work establishment did not believe we were capable of becoming professional social workers or that Black people as a group deserved access to social work services. Black social workers in the District of Columbia did not listen to this. Instead, we fought, building a Black social work tradition of professionalism, quality, compassion, and a practice rooted in our knowledge and love of our community. The Phyllis Wheatley YWCA, the first YWCA branch founded by and for African Americans, is here in DC. The Black social workers in the District of Columbia who built and sustained this institution looked out for the needs of Black people living here when no one else would. Developing youth programs, supporting us during the Depression and 2 world wars. Dorothy Height, a Black social worker in the District of Columbia who served as the head of the Phyllis Wheatley YWCA during World War II, used insights gained from her work in our community to expose the evil impacts of legalized segregation in DC and help dismantle it. Whitney Young Jr., the executive director of the National Urban League, was a Black social worker in the District of Columbia who drew on decades of working with and for Black people to become a powerful and effective advocate for our rights at the highest level of the federal government. The positive impact of the Howard University School of Social Work on this nation is too vast to be measured. Its students and faculty, many of whom are Black social workers in the District of Columbia, have played a central role in reshaping social work research and education to reflect the unique and valuable insights of Black people. To conclude, any test that does not reflect the excellence, the dedication, the competence, and the contributions of Black social workers in the District of Columbia before the early 1980s is not a valid test. I encourage everyone to reflect on all that we have done before this test was required and all that we will do once we have removed yet another barrier designed to limit us. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Lisa K's. Oh,
I'm here.
Oh, I see you now. There you
Okay.
are. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, Chair Henderson and council members. Thank you for allowing me to share my enthusiastic support for this critical legislation. I'm Lisa Kays, and I've been a DC social worker since 2011. I run a successful practice in DuPont Circle and have been an ASWB continuing education provider since 2015. I want you to know that I will not renew my ASWB credentials because their role in perpetuating systemic harm makes it impossible for me to voluntarily align with them and not be in violation of the Social Work Code of Ethics. Despite an MSW GPA of 3.9 and exceptional marks from supervisors, I failed practice exams repeatedly because the exam has little to do with our actual education and practice. Early in my career, I had to report my supervisor to the board for unethical conduct. I can't know the outcome of that investigation, but I do know they found he had no records of our supervision, a basic requirement of his role. He passed his ASWB exams. Having published on and taught ethics for nearly a decade, I can assure you that our profession, like any other, is made up of ethical practitioners and problematic ones, all of whom have passed these exams. The idea that the exam protects us from bad actors is unequivocally false. It is a fantasy. It's not reality. It is important to keep in mind that not only does it cost nothing for the gatekeepers of my profession to maintain this fantasy, many benefit from it by making money from test prep and having less competition for clients. It makes millions for the ASWB. The true cost is paid by actual aspiring social workers and the communities like ours that they can't serve. People like my current Latina, second-generation immigrant, Spanish-speaking supervisee, who has sat for her clinical exam 5 times. Instead of spending the last 5 years gaining advanced clinical knowledge, she has spent nearly $2,000 studying for and retaking a standardized test. She is beyond demoralized, and it's an effort for her to justify staying in this profession. Here's how many points she's been off on each attempt: 5, then 1, then 9, then 2, then 1. I find these numbers to be meaningless after sitting with her in over 11 months of supervision, where I observe her actual skill, thinking, and ethics. Without hesitation, I would sign my name right now in front of all of you to her ability to practice independently. I can't, though, because a biased, highly flawed multiple choice test is valued more highly by the DC Board of Social Work than my assessment. This racist exam is taken more seriously than I am, despite my decade of advanced expertise in this field. When you consider DC's shortage of bilingual clinicians and practitioners working with children, and she is both, my supervisee is a unicorn. Why are we gatekeeping her and risking her leaving our profession? Why are we depriving our city of a desperately needed clinician? Is it worth it? In service of a myth about public safety that we know to be false? I urge you to support this bill as introduced. Thank you.
Thank you. Benita, scholar.
Good morning. Hi, how's everybody today? I'm on here in favor of the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. I too came into this practice as my second career. I started out in business. So my undergrad is business. So I moved forward to social services with my master's degree. I am one of the people who have experienced the challenges of not being able to get jobs or being turned down for jobs because I'm not licensed. Being told, can I get my license in 60 days? Can I get my license in 90 days? No, I can't. I have paid for supervision. I have submitted my package twice for licensure. It's currently pending for licensure now. Submitted a package for Maryland as well. I've paid somewhere about $1,500 so far. Working in the field about 15 years, worked at various agencies. I was a psych associate master's level at the prison system for Maryland at Patuxent Institution in the Women's Prison of Maryland at one time for a few years. I have worked at Shepherd Pratt for 5 or 6 years in psychiatric hospital. I've worked with CSOSA funded program for assisting women with reentry into the system. I used to go pick up former inmates from a correctional facility and transport them to our program. I've had a multitude of jobs, 6 to 7 years at DC General, working as a case coordinator with our vulnerable clients that were in the shelter before it closed. Veterans Administration case man, worked in all these jobs, but anytime I would go for a position in the last 5 years, I think it was around 2017 or so, when I would go for a position in DC as anything, case coordinator, case worker, anything like that, they stopped me at the door. Do you have your license? No, they will not accept my other degree, but they will, like she said, like several people said, they will allow other people to work who are not licensed, who don't have a master's degree in that field. But I'm not out of work. They say can't even talk to me because I have a master's degree and I have to be licensed. So I find this to be very biased. I find this to be detrimental. I also am 12 hours for my doctorate of counseling psychology, but I ran out of money, couldn't continue to go to school. And the pay disparity is something to, fighting so hard for a job that's paying $45,000, $50,000 when anybody else with as much education as I have probably is making upwards in their practice, in their field, probably making closer to $100,000 without my license. With the license, I would double my rate, my pay. So with my license, I'll be coming in at the rate I work, because the way I work, I would probably be closer to $80,000, $80,000 to $100,000, because I used to work a job and a half. So, but without my license, this is the disparity and the economic disadvantages are just great. And so I would like for this to change, and hopefully you will consider this moving forward. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Katrina Carter. Okay. Andrea Harrell.
I'm here.
Yes, go ahead. Present your testimony.
Good morning and greetings to everyone and our esteemed council members. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is Andrea Harrell. I am a district resident and a licensed clinical social worker of 29 years with the district government. I come before you today to oppose the social work license modernization bill. In 1994, I graduated from the School of Social Work at Howard University. At this time, Child and Family Services Agency was involved in the LaShawn lawsuit. The agency had representatives come to Howard to actively recruit graduating social workers to address a shortage which impacted services. We were provided with a provisional license until we could take and pass the social work exam. This addressed the social work shortage and helped to keep children and families of the district safe. I stayed with CFSA for 6 years, and within that time obtained my LICSW, Independent Clinical Social Work License. It wasn't entirely easy, but for the population I was serving and the work I wanted to do, it was and is still needed. In order to fully and appropriately identify and address the myriad of issues that the children and families of the district present with, social workers with the appropriate training, background, and licensure is vital. I implore you to invest in social work and social workers. Please do not do a disservice to your constituents, the children, adults, and families by shortchanging them on the quality of professional service they deserve. This would not be asked of other professional licensing bodies. Social workers are change agents and have a strong legacy of advocating for the disenfranchised. Well, today we are the disenfranchised and want to advocate for our profession and the predecessors who fought to have social work recognized as a profession. If there is a racial bias in the licensing exam, then we should be advocating to review and change the exam. If there is a shortage of social workers, then there should be concerted efforts to actively recruit and retain social workers locally and nationally. If a social worker needs time to prepare for the exam, DC should reinstitute the provisional license that was offered in 1994. The police department is currently offering $25,000 to join the force. DC should similarly offer incentives for social workers, such as signing bonuses and competitive salaries. Again, please invest in social work. Give our past, current, and future social workers the respect we have fought for and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Jolia Gorman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jolia Gorman. Good morning, Chair Henderson and members of the Committee on Health. I am a school-based mental health therapist at Mary Center, partnered with a DC public charter school, and I have been a licensed social worker for 5 years in DC, 2 as an LGSW and 3 as an LICSW. And the entirety of my work has been in the school-based mental health program, funded in large part through the DC Department of Behavioral Health. In this program, licensed social workers and counselors spend our working hours in a school building, providing prevention, early intervention, and intensive mental health services. We are meeting students, staff, and families where they're at, literally. I love this job and the access it provides for students all over the city. And if there were people like me and my colleagues in every school in DC, which is the dream of the program, students in every school would have easy access to mental health services, but there aren't. There's a huge shortage of school-based clinicians and social workers, and the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023 will directly impact this shortage. Thus, I request your support of this act. This is an important bill to bring needed reform to the social work licensing process. I'm thrilled that if passed, these exams will no longer keep competent LSWA and LGSW level social workers from doing vital work with vulnerable Washington, DC residents. We are in a mental health crisis and a workforce shortage, and we need more competent social workers in DC. In their 40 years of existence, social work licensing exams have never been correlated with safe and competent social work practice, even after revisions because of the racist policies. Not only are they not effective measurement tools, they actively discriminate against BIPOC, older, non-native English speaking, and deaf social workers. Rather than watering down the licensure process or delegitimizing the profession, this legislation will bring greater legitimacy to our profession. Our current license standards, minus the exam requirement, are sufficient for social work at the lower license levels. All applicants for the lower license levels have to complete an accredited graduate social work program, which always includes an intensive internship requirement. If social work students don't pass their internship from these accredited programs where they are actively practicing social work ethics and values, then they don't get their degree, which means they cannot apply for a license. As Rachel was talking about, when we're studying for the ASWB exams, we're told to be in exam brain rather than and get out of real work brain. That's because this test is not an effective way to measure a potential social worker's ability to be an effective social worker. Being a social worker does not translate to a multiple choice exam because people cannot be standardized. I encourage all of you to support this bill, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And thank you to all of this panel of witnesses. And if you haven't given us your written testimony, please go back to the site and upload it, because I'm trying to take notes here, but some of you were dropping some gems that I want to go back and sort of look up some more. I want to follow up on a couple of things. Ms. Case, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your experience and background. As a supervisee, if you will, and then also someone who was supervised, in lieu of the exam, do you feel like there is some other alternative that would inform the board of social work around whether or not the person is qualified and should be licensed? Or do you feel like everything else that is required is sufficient?
I think that everything else that is required is sufficient. It's hard to convey the extensiveness of our supervision process and the way that we are scrutinized by multiple people. Most of our sites in the first 2 years, I had 3 to 4 supervisors looking at my work, scrutinizing it, looking at my documentation. We are informed and evaluated by a number of different people, and that process is rigorous. It's very, very, and what I want to convey too is that as a supervisor, we do say no. There were multiple people kicked out of my MSW program in the first year because they weren't demonstrating basic competence in their internship program. So this isn't like, oh, you give us your money and we let you graduate. Multiple people didn't make it through because of just basic competence issues. And as supervisors, we do say, and will not sign forms and say like, this person isn't going to be a fit. So to me, the rigor of that process is all that is needed. And the exam is so disparate from what we do and how we practice that I see it as like a nonsensical corollary, honestly.
Okay.
Our supervision process is serious.
Got it. Ms. Sims, I saw you shaking and nodding your head on that. I don't know if you wanted to add your thoughts on whether or not there's an alternative or if everything else but the exam is enough.
Honestly, I feel that, and one of the things that I would love to have the opportunity to also bring in that I haven't heard anyone talk about yet is how our curriculums in accredited schools of social work are very tightly controlled. The Council on Social Work Education makes sure that there are standards that programs meet and competencies that are taught. And that is in addition, right? So these curriculums are really, there's a lot of quality control there. So the curriculum is very standardized across programs. And that's in addition to all of the hard work that we do as students in internships where we are very closely supervised. And then 2 more years of really close supervision. And, I feel like it's really just actually incredibly rigorous and challenging. And the exam is like, it really has almost nothing to do with what I learned in my MSW program or what I do every day as a social worker.
So let me ask this and I've heard this from some people, right? There is this, for whatever reason, and I'm saying whatever reason, because I'm not a social worker, so I'm not necessarily familiar with these organizations as intimately as you all, but people seem to like trust the Council of Social Work Education, but really give the side eye to the Association of Social Work Boards. Why?
Well, the Association of Social Work Boards, and I think there are people here that probably know a lot more because I know many people that I've talked to have spent so many years researching this entity, but it is really an entity that exists to extract money from social workers. And, they have the resources and the money to produce these standardized tests. The Council on Social Work Education is different, right? I certainly would not argue any of these things are perfect, but the Council on Social Work Education is an entity made up of people who really care about what social workers are learning, and they accept lots of feedback from people in the community, from other social workers, from educational leaders. In fact, I've looked at their historical papers, and they have a rich history of really, being in touch with people and trying to figure out what a social work education would look like. This isn't perfect, but it's a lot different than a very opaque entity who really exists to kind of make money off of standardized testing.
Okay, I'm gonna go over a little bit of my time, and then I'm gonna give Councilmember White some extra time too, because I want to bring Ms. Harrell into this conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and I do appreciate you raising some of the history that we've had here in the district, particularly some of the lawsuits and consent decrees that have been particularly around back at a time when some of our agencies struggled in terms of having enough social workers, having social workers who were well trained, all of these different pieces. But I guess my question is, do you feel like the exam is some sort of stopgap safety lever to ensure that everyone is sort of on the same level? Ms. Harrell?
Actually, I would agree with that at the time. Yes, we I guess we just felt that it was an expectation, and it did. It was a stopgap, but it also kind of reinforced things that we needed to go further in our careers and further in what we were doing at that time.
Okay. All right. Thank you again for being here. Just hold on. Councilmember White, we'll have some questions for all of you. Councilmember White.
Thank you. And thank you to this panel. Let me start with Ms. Harrell. I appreciate you being here. And you mentioned a word in your testimony that I think is particularly important, and that is respect. I think there has been in recent years a significant ground shift in how the general population perceive and respect mental health and mental health professionals. And so I think when we think about the lens with which people look at mental health professionals, we shouldn't look back to how folks used to look at mental health professionals, but really look forward to sort of where we are now and what that looks like going forward. I just think that the respect is there more broadly. There's been a lot of discussion today about the rigorous education, training, supervision, which do speak to your points about the competence of people working. You mentioned a couple themes in your testimony: bias and shortage of social workers. Let me start with the issue of the shortage of social workers. With regard to this test, do you know of any evidence correlating the passage of this test and the competence of social workers?
Do I know? I don't have any data on that.
Okay. One of the recommendations you made or suggestions that you made, going back to, I guess, your early years in the profession, was having provisional licenses and to address a shortage. Now, we do have a shortage of social workers. My concern with that is that a provisional license doesn't address the well-known bias in the exam. And so what are your thoughts on creating a provisional license, but still leaving an exam with well-known bias?
I would actually feel that we could address both. Why couldn't we provide social workers, graduating social workers, with a provisional license while they're preparing to study for an exam, and creating a task force to address the bias or the reported bias in the exam?
I appreciate that. For me, in the way that I think about this, I'm not a practitioner as you are, but it would lead me back to my first question about the lack of any correlating evidence between passage of the exam and competence in the field. What I want to make sure is that we don't have a test for the sake of having a test, but that it meets a real need. And so I think we have a disagreement there, but I appreciate and very much respect your testimony. Let me ask Rachel Doyle, do you have thoughts on the idea of creating a provisional license?
I do. Thanks for asking. I would come back to a couple of things. One, we know that there's no proof that this exam measures what it says it does. And part of me thinks that, well, if the opposition really thought that this exam measured what it says it does, why would they be advocating for social workers to be able to practice without having passed this exam? So I think we must all be in some level of agreement that this exam doesn't actually measure anything. It measures the ability to take a test. Secondly, what will happen if we implement provisional license for 1 year? We're going to encounter the same issues that we had when the Board of Social Work tightened its definition of unlicensed social work, and we're going to end up with people who are doing their jobs well being fired, and that doesn't benefit anybody. That only benefits the ASWB and their testing fees.
Thank you. Ms. Scholler, you mentioned in your testimony that you paid, I think you said about $1,500 so far. What was that for?
I have submitted my licensure for the District of Columbia twice. I'm currently pending, and I submitted licensure for Maryland as well. And I paid for a 7-week course in-house where I had to go every Saturday for 7 weeks to take a 7-hour course. And I paid for online material. It's probably more. I'm sorry, I forgot about all that. I paid for online material. I've been paying for study guides, study books. So at $200, everybody in the field know how much the books cost. $200, $150, $100 a book. The prices add up.
Is there a test? Is there a fee for the test?
There is a fee for the test.
And is there a separate fee for an application?
The application, no, I apologize. I paid for the application. So the application to be reviewed and to allow you to then sit for the exam. So I'm on my second application and with DC, and then I have one for with Maryland. One worker in Maryland, just FYI, I know it's not a DC issue, but for example, there's only one worker in Maryland for the whole board, and she was in a car accident. It's supposed to be a 60-day process. It took them 9 months to process my application, only to be told I needed a signature that I couldn't obtain. And that's why I didn't get my license in Maryland, which I would have then did reciprocal to DC. 9 months later, I was unable to get the license because my DON was, she had her master's in nursing and did not have her master's in social worker counseling. So the board refused my license packet. Nothing else was wrong with it. All they needed, I was at Shepherd Pratt. I was working in the field, psychiatric hospital. All they needed was a signature, and I couldn't obtain a signature from a direct supervisor. Let me restate that. They wouldn't accept a signature from no other person in the hospital continuum of Shepherd Pratt. If anybody knows how big that place is, that had to be my direct supervisor.
I'm sorry to hear that. If I could ask one more just quick question. Who administers the course that you take?
I apologize. Say it again.
The course that you take to prepare for the test, is that by like a private company or is that by
Yes,
ASWB?
yes. I apologize. I forgot the young lady's name. She is actually, she was a worker at CFSA for many years, and she went on to, I think, Innova Hospital Systems. I just forgot the name that she went under for her licensed business. She has a profitable licensed business, and she came highly recommended for people in the district.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you so much to this panel. Thank you,
No problem.
Chairperson Henderson.
Thank you again to this panel and Chairman White. Later in the witness list, we do have the head of the Association of Social Work Boards here, so she might be able to answer some of the questions that Ms. Harrell was unable to answer. But thank you all again for being here, and we will go on to the next panel of witnesses. Will Doyle, Matthew DiCarlo, Rachel Johnston, Carol Wills, Mark Lavoda, Sherilyn Pipkin, and Kelly Sweeney Machine. Okay, I see Will, so we'll start there. Will?
Yeah, pardon my background. I had to move due to some noise upstairs. Good morning, Chair Henderson and council members. My name is Will Doyle, LICSW, and I'm highly in favor of this bill. I'm the Director of Housing Operations at Pathways to Housing DC, and have been a licensed social worker in DC for over 15 years. The ASWB released exam pass rate data in August 2022, calling into question whether we can continue to rely on ASWB exams as part of the social work licensing requirements. If there was any evidence of their underlying value, then finding ways to fix these exams to address pass rate disparities could be a reasonable response. However, in over 40 years of use, no such data has been produced. In response to 2023-FOIA-05123, requesting proof that the ASWB exams are reliable and valid, that the ASWB exams follow industry standards for psychometrics, that passing the ASWB exams is correlated with competence, ethical practice of social work, and public protection, the DC Department of Health responded that it did not have documents responsive to the request. How can we justify the continued use of ASWB exams when the Department of Health, tasked with regulating the practice of social work in DC, can't provide any information to support their use? From March 2020 to the present, 85 unlicensed social workers, individuals with a BSW or MSW from accredited social work programs, have applied for a PSHP case manager position at Pathways to Housing. In the midst of a pandemic, when this council has provided incredible support to expanding housing resources for our most vulnerable residents, biased and worthless exams have prevented qualified and willing individuals from contributing to end chronic homelessness in DC. From 2011 to 2021, DC would have an additional 474 licensed social workers if all test takers passed at the white pass rate. Given the DC Board of Social Work's scope of practice policy, which states that no person may practice social work in the district without a license, none of these individuals are able to fill any of the many vacant social work positions. As of last Saturday, there were 129 DC-based job postings for LGSWs on Indeed. This included such important positions as mental health, domestic violence, and school-based therapists, acute care and clinical hospital social workers, care managers for elderly and medically fragile patients, CFSA social workers, inpatient psychiatry social workers, perinatal social workers, substance abuse clinicians, and hospice social workers. The use of the ASWB exams is negatively impacting DC residents of all ages, regardless of demographic and socioeconomic status. This legislation would end the ASWB exam barrier for the LSWA and LGSW license levels, both of which have more limited scope of practice and minimal risks as a result. Both LSWAs and LGSWs are also required to practice under the supervision of an LICSW or LISW. Given the broader scope of practice at the LICSW and LISW license levels, a task force will be created to identify an alternative to the ASWB exams. This aligns perfectly with the National Association of Social Workers position and would increase the effectiveness of the Pathways to Behavioral Health Degrees Act. I am asking that you support this bill as introduced. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Matthew DiCarlo.
Hi, thank you very much for your time. My name is Dr. Matthew DiCarlo. I'm a social worker, educator, researcher, director of an MSW program, and former licensed graduate social worker in Washington, DC. I am also a former housing social worker at Pathways to Housing and Community Connections. Although there are many issues with the ASWB exam, I will confine my comments to what can be publicly verified by policymakers as you make your decision on whether to eliminate ASWB exams and embrace alternate measures of competence. First, it is important to note that ASWB has sustained an annual 17% profit margin for the past 11 years, and that's 29% in the most recently available year. Over that time period, their net assets have increased by 450%. You can just check ProPublica. ASWB is also unique among exam developers in that it analyzes for unfair items, not just during pre-testing when they don't impact people's scores, but on scored items as well. ASWB has a long history of stating that they monitor for bias in scored items, but they have never publicly reported how many scored items have been removed. They've never addressed this question under oath, and you may wish to ask them today. For example, in 2020, Stacey Owens, item development consultant, said scored items are continually monitored for diff. On an annual basis, less than 5% of items show diff, and items flagged for diff are removed. Their former CEO says when an item is live on an exam, we continue to look at diff statistics, and if it begins to show bias in one direction or another, it is pulled from the exam. Their current examination director said the same thing. Yet, these ongoing analyses are never reported to state boards. There's no publicly reported process for ASWB saying, hey, that person who failed your exam by 1 or 2 points, there was actually a biased item on there that we caught later. You may want to revisit that person's decision. One last issue I want to leave you with is that ASWB is required to analyze for bias, not just at the item level, but at the test level. I worked with 2 psychometricians this summer with decades of academic and consulting experience in evaluating measurement equivalence to submit a $0 proposal to ASWB's recent request for proposals to investigate issues with exam bias. They did not even evaluate the merits of our proposal. Even though all we needed was our stats, the free software, their exam bias data, and a computer, they said that it was not clear to them that we needed exam data beyond what was in the report that all of you have read. This is just patently false. The joint standards on psychological and educational testing require them to measure things like the test information function. And we know in 2010, they used to do that. And they called these measures of reliability their preferred way of doing things. They stopped doing it in 2010. They're just shoddy methodologists. And that's why I encourage you to support this bill.
Thank you. Rachel?
Good afternoon, or I guess it's good morning, Chairperson Henderson and members of the committee. My name is Rachel Johnston. I'm a Ward 5 resident and the Chief of Staff of the DC Charter School Alliance, the local nonprofit dedicated to ensuring all students in DC receive the great public education they deserve. Last year was the first time since the pandemic started in 2020 that schools could focus on student learning continuously without mass interruptions due to quarantines and COVID-related closures. But during the pandemic, students suffered significant trauma, including loss, grief, economic hardship, depression, and stress, and lacked quality opportunities to build social emotional skills. Our city is seeing this trauma materialize in a variety of ways, including increased violence in the community. And it does not simply disappear when students enter their school buildings. It drastically impacts their ability to learn and succeed. That's why ensuring that the needs of the whole child are met, both physical and mental, is critical. Public charter schools are doing all they can to provide mental health services, but to do this, they need more staffing support. Our schools continue to prioritize funding to staff the roles needed to do this work, but filling these positions can be challenging. And we are grateful more schools have access to the Department of Behavioral Health's school-based mental health program than ever before. However, community-based organizations are still also struggling to staff schools with high-quality clinicians. In fact, there are numerous vacancies across the program right now. That's why we appreciate the council for responding by introducing this bill to grow the pool of qualified clinicians and provide additional social worker support in our schools. I want to share our support for this bill's efforts to both expand and diversify the pipeline of qualified clinicians by identifying alternatives to examination requirements that determine an applicant's fitness for licensure, removing testing requirements while leaving in place other rigorous requirements and oversight has the potential to both grow the pool of qualified social workers while also diversifying the existing pipeline. That's critical, as findings from the Association of Social Work Boards reveal a large disparity between white test takers, 84% of whom passed the exam the first time, and Black test takers who passed the exam 45% of the time. And yet there's no data showing that exams are good indicators of someone's ability or knowledge to demonstrate competence. Other states, such as Illinois, have removed the testing requirement for basic licensure. They have recognized that instead of strengthening professional standards, examination requirements only serve to add additional burdens to historically marginalized groups in becoming licensed social workers, limiting the potential pipeline of clinicians. That's why we support evidence-based alternatives to examination requirements. As you consider the details of this bill, we have 2 small but important recommendations we believe can help ensure greater quality mental health supports reach schools and the students that they serve. First, we strongly recommend that the task force this bill creates to identify an assessment method for independent social work licensure include at least one school-based social worker. That's important because the unique aspects of school-based social work and their needs must be represented. We hope that with a diverse group of thinkers, the city can pursue innovative solutions like joining 17 other states in the Social Work Licensure Compact, or pursuing reciprocity agreements with Maryland, Virginia, and other surrounding jurisdictions. Second, prior to implementation, we urge the city to assess whether it has the appropriate capacity from licensed independent clinicians to supervise non-independent social workers to support alternatives to examination. In the absence of an examination, it becomes one of the only tools that provide oversight for LGSWs and LSWAs. Supervision also provides the benefits of quality assurance, guidance, and support. In closing, ensuring the needs of the whole child are met, including their mental health needs, is one of the first and foremost priorities for charter schools. We appreciate the response to the need for more quality licensed clinicians in our schools. We continue to be grateful for our partnership with the city, and we welcome the opportunity to continue collaborating to make sure every student's health needs are met so they can actively and safely engage in learning. Thank you for your time and attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Don't see Carol Willis. Mark?
Morning, Chairperson Henderson and members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Mark Lavoda. I'm the Executive Director of the District of Columbia Behavioral Health Association and a Ward 2 homeowner. The District of Columbia Behavioral Health Association advances high-quality whole person care for district residents with mental illnesses or substance use disorders. Our 32 member organizations provide care to over 32,000 district residents annually, almost all who are Medicaid beneficiaries. In the midst of significant healthcare workforce shortages, we support this legislation's primary objective to remove barriers to licensure, especially for Black applicants, by discontinuing use of national exams for the bachelor and graduate levels of licensure. You've heard testimony of multiple others today sharing racial disparities of the ASWB exam pass rates. The Board of Social Work requires passing the national exam as a condition of licensure despite these known disparities. While the argument has been raised that rather than eliminating exam requirements, we should instead focus on better exam preparation for those at risk of failing, multiple other conditions of licensure ensure that applicants would be able to practice safely, regardless of exam performance. These include graduation from Council of Social Work Education approved, regionally accredited programs, completion within those programs of hundreds of hours of supervised internships and practicum time, and continuing requirements for clinical supervision for thousands of hours, even once licensed, to become eligible to apply for licenses at more advanced levels. For those who received their supervised training and ongoing clinical supervision in organizations, including many that belong to the District of Columbia Behavioral Health Association, working in organizations where the organization is also subject to licensing and certification requirements should provide further confidence that bachelor and graduate licensed individuals, regardless of their ability to achieve a passing score on an inherently flawed exam, are developing their skills and receiving supervision in organizations that face regulatory requirements and scrutiny to ensure district residents receive appropriate healthcare services. Relying on an exam with known racial disparities deters Black social work degree holders from completing licensure and deprives our communities of social workers who look like and come from the communities that they serve. Given wealth disparities between Black people and other racial groups in the United States and in the district, one might reasonably presume economic disparities exacerbate the consequences of revoking permission to work for Black applicants who fail the exam but otherwise would have joined the workforce. I have a few technical comments about the text of the proposed legislation included in my written testimony, but I'd like to use my remaining time to address a few issues in DC Health's written testimony, which you'll formally hear later today. We're disappointed that DC Health is officially taking a position that at least appears to be opposed to removing the exams. My earlier testimony articulates the multiple other safeguards that will ensure continued safe practice. I'm pleased that we appear to share DC Health's concerns about the lack of available supervisors, but I would argue that DC Health's testimony reaches the wrong conclusion. Constraints on available supervision are not a good reason to deny applicants who are other qualified, except for passing a biased exam, entry to the workforce. In any case, I would prefer to let qualified supervisors have every possible opportunity to fill their supervision capacity and support the maximum available qualified workforce, which we so desperately need right now. I hope with upcoming changes to the Health Occupation Revision Act or other standalone legislation, DC Health will agree that supervision of social workers should be expanded significantly beyond LICSWs. I would also argue that the need for additional entrance to the workforce, along with the burdens on individual applicants who have failed or are likely to fail the exam, far outweighs the value of any delay from shifting the LSWA and LGSW exams to no change until a report is issued by a task force. Members of this council are well aware of the perils of bureaucratic delay awaiting task force reports, even after task forces complete their work and vote to approve recommendations. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark. Sherilyn?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Sherilyn Pipkin. I'm a clinical social worker with the Department of Behavioral Health. I've supervised for over 25 years for practicum students for the different universities, as well as being a union delegate for over 25 years for the social workers for the DBH. I'm coming in from a different perspective that I do want to say that I am not in support of this modernization. I believe that there are biases in the exam, but that's what we need to tackle. We need to work on changing the exam so it can be culturally appropriate for everyone. I believe that there's a lot of test anxieties that they, having to sit down and take the test or prepare for the test can be very anxiety provoking. They need to find a way to provide free and low cost for these test taking classes. And even at CFSA provided it for us for free where we could review all the information. Jewel Golden, I believe, is the person that you were talking about who provided those classes at CFSA. We also need to consider having a 2-year, I'm even willing to do a 2-year provisional license. So therefore they can be supervised under LICSW, get all the supervision they need along with preparation for the exam. But if they can't pass it in 2 years, then perhaps they don't need to be in the social work profession. We also could consider having an oral exam. Virginia has an oral exam. So if you're not good with writing, you might be able to present all your skills through an oral presentation. My concern is the issue with quality versus quantity. I work with a lot of the school-based social workers for DBH, and there are shortages, but a lot of it has to do with them not being able to have all the services they need put in place. The idea is to provide quality service and not just open up the doors so we can hire a bunch of social workers to fill the positions. Whenever there's, we're dealing with lots of trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and even the mass shootings. When there's a mass shooting, the first thing they say, it's a mental health issue. If someone in your family was physically abused, sexual abuse, domestic violence, would you want them to go to a person that cannot pass the exam? I think not. And just like the council member Henderson stated, this has not been asked of any other discipline. Plenty of people fail the nursing exam, psychology, especially the LSAT with the lawyers. There's lots of people have anxiety, but you have to keep pursuing it and it'll work. I have had the social work and the LICSW and the LGS license for over 29 years. And I do think there are some biases. So there are some things that we can change. But my concern is that the system is broken. We need to invest more money into the services and resources for the community. A lot of this acting out in the schools is due to the trauma that's going on in the homes. So we need to find a way to have a mandate for the parents to come to the schools and get the services. Right now, they're just talking with the children. That doesn't resolve the issue because even if you call home and say the child is acting out, there may not be a consequence and the kids feel free to act out in school because there's no punishment. We need to find a way to access help for the parents and to support them. Also, when we send these children away to residential facilities, we're paying all this money for them to get all these services, and they may have been rehabilitated. But when you don't have the parent involvement or family involvement, they come back to the area within a chaotic home, and they have the same access to all of this chaos, and the behaviors continue.
Thank you, Ms. Pipkin.
Like I said.
Oh, sorry. If you want to wrap, you're about a minute over your time.
Okay. All right. So with the salaries, part of the issue is that the salaries are low and that social workers want to, especially with DBH, they want to have the option to work virtually. They are being mandated to go into the schools, even when it's a professional work day for the teachers. There's no students there, but they still have to report the work. They worked virtually during COVID, and they should have that option to do that just as well. My concern is nobody's talking about, except for what the councilwoman the senator from Maryland stated, that her goal is to eliminate all of the licenses. And we know that there's supposed to be a task force to get rid of LICSW as well. So who's going to be supervising all these employees that you're talking about? You need to have a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McShane?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Kelly Sweeney McShane, CEO at Community of Hope. We are a federally qualified health center as well as a provider of services for families experiencing homelessness in Washington, D.C. I'm here to testify in support of the Social Work Licensing Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. At Community of Hope, we believe that the provisions of the Act, which eliminate the ASWB exam requirement at the bachelor's and master's levels, will allow us to hire more candidates who are qualified and who can then better support our patients and our clients. Across our organization, Community of Hope employs about 75 staff working directly with families and patients in case management roles. At this size, we are always hiring for at least one program, and we strive to hire the best possible candidates. Our case management positions are ideal for early social work career opportunities for newer social work school graduates, and we are committed to providing these staff with supervisions by the licensed clinical staff. BSW and MSW trained applicants are often ideal for this position and bring the relevant education and internship experiences that we seek in case managers. Unfortunately, we are not able to hire most social work trained applicants for a job based on the current Board of Social Work licensure requirements. In fact, the social work requirements have pushed us to not seek and hire social work graduates for applicable positions, and instead choose graduates with different degrees and training who could do the work with the right practical experience, but without triggering the Board of Social Work's oversight. And I know there was a conversation earlier about this, but for example, we have a cultural anthropology major as a case manager in our homelessness prevention program. Because they didn't have a degree in social work, they are not under the Board of Social Work system. So the current system actually decreases the availability of educated and trained social workers at our agency and the community, and is clearly not a desired outcome. We are challenged, though, by the fact that some of the Department of Human Services contracts require that staff have a social work license, which often result in months of staff vacancies while we search for eligible candidates. This has had a negative impact on the ability for providers like Community of Hope, and you heard also from other providers today, to house and support clients who are connected to a permanent supportive housing voucher but cannot lease up before they're assigned to a case manager. Related to these challenges, Community has found that there are racial inequities in the current system, and we've certainly heard a lot of information about the nationwide information. But we looked at also our internal data, and we saw the same reality. About 5 years ago, when we were still hiring candidates before passing the test, Community of Hope reviewed first-time test takers. 75% of first-time white applicant test takers passed, 100% of Hispanic applicants passed, and 21% of Black applicants passed. And this data is one of the reasons that Community of Hope has become involved and active in advocating for changes related to supervision and testing requirements. As we've heard today, if you don't pass the test, you have to wait 90 days, pay another fee, take the test again, all while not being able to work in your chosen field. Fewer licensed people of color means there are fewer trained social workers to work within the Black and Brown communities where we serve, thus denying the communities the advantages of working with people who have the specific training of a social work education and who reflect the lived experience of that community. We support the requirement of continued tests at the LICSW levels, as well as a task force to look into more appropriate assessment. And I would just note that my concern about doing a task force before removing the test is that task force can often take at least a year, if not longer. And we are in an urgent situation where there are people who are looking for jobs, we are looking to hire and wanting to serve more people within the community. So I urge you to pass this act and welcome any questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Now, Kelly, I don't like long task force, long commissions. we try to do things efficiently. Let's have the conversation and go forth. No, but thank you guys so much for being here and for your testimony. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Your testimony, you always come with good ideas of how we can improve legislation. And so I just want to express appreciation for that, as well as lifting up the unique needs of school-based individuals in sort of this conversation, which often gets left out. I want to ask a question. Will, you're here. Kelly, I think you have some supervision piece. Sherilyn, I know you are most certainly have been a supervisor, but what's the best practice in terms of caseload of number of associates or graduate level students any one person should supervise at any given time? What's the best practice for that?
I mean, I can speak specifically to our setting. And so we have a maximum of like 7, and that's, whether they're social workers or not, in terms of our PSH program, okay, that supervisor would supervise directly.
Okay. Ms. Pipkin, how many do you do at any given time? Or would you prefer, like, you're on mute.
I'm not in a supervisory position at the time. I mostly supervise the social work interns, and I'm a union delegate for the school-based, all social workers in DBH, but it's predominantly school-based social workers.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Because I think that's an interesting question. Again, we had witnesses who spoke earlier around, they take the job of being a supervisor very seriously. But frankly, I guess the original, when I first heard it, I was like, I just feel like this whole process is like fraught for trouble in terms of the supervision piece. There are certainly people who are bad actors who take advantage of it, but I'm just trying to understand, like, everyone is saying, well, we have all the supervision. Who audits the supervisors to make sure that somebody didn't just sign the paper, but nothing happened? Who does that?
So I would just argue, especially embedded with an agency like Community of Hope, we have regular performance evaluations going on. So it's not just about passing the test, but it's about supervising and actively monitoring the performance, interacting directly with clients. And for example, for Community of Hope, we do regularly, as part of our evaluation system, get feedback from clients about how things are going, as well as from the supervisor. So I think somebody else talked about the real live multiple hours experience. And as an agency, that's our job, to make sure that our staff are qualified and doing a great job in the job they're supposed to do.
Okay. Mr. Lovato, we've talked in the past about the need for reciprocity agreements with our neighbors, Maryland and Virginia, ways, because we know we have lots of folks who practice across the jurisdictions and multiple jurisdictions. Do you have any concerns that the district could do this and Maryland and Virginia not, and then we're stuck?
Not really. I think that we have to acknowledge that there are still multiple pathways for people to achieve licensure across jurisdictions. And while all of us want it to be easier, the reality is Maryland and Virginia have endorsement processes. Virginia, if you work in a nonprofit organization right now, you don't even need to have a license. The nonprofit organization takes responsibility for that individual's practice. And so there are multiple other protections. There are multiple other pathways.
So wait, why not do that? Why get rid of the exam as opposed to changing the structure such that the nonprofit is now taking on some of the responsibility?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, nonprofit organizations in the district and for-profit organizations often, to do the work in mental health or substance use treatment, have to be themselves licensed or certified by DC Health or DBH. So we scrutinize at the organization level as well as at the clinical practice level for the individuals already in the current system. There's a lot of oversight for making sure these services are provided safely.
Okay. Ms. Pipkin, you mentioned that Virginia has an oral exam option. Is that available to everyone?
Well, it's a dual process. They do written and oral. So I don't know why that's something we can't consider doing, like either or. I think Virginia does both, which does make it even more anxiety provoking. But if we had an option where you could do either or, I think that might be a best option for other people.
Okay, I'll ask some folks further down in the panel. My I guess pre-understanding when I was preparing for this hearing was that at one point California had a oral exam option, and then that was A, very expensive for California, but also B, also fraught with some bias claims because you have two individuals who are essentially subjectively deciding whether or not how you answered a question, if they feel like that is appropriate. So, something for us to consider going further. And I am well over my time. Councilmember White.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Henderson. It's such an interesting topic, and it does require some time. Let me start with Mr. DiCarlo. And there are a lot of themes in this hearing, and they are important. One is bias in the exam. Should we look at changing the exam to get rid of bias? There's another conversation about shortage of social workers. I want to try to focus a little bit though, because those are ancillary issues that we don't get to unless there is a point to the test. So if the point of the exam, I'm a lawyer and a philosophy major, so I need this to make sense. If the point of the exam is to ensure competence, but there is no evidence correlating passing the exam to competence, I cannot understand what we are defending on the exam. We don't even get to the bias. Now I see some confused looks, but I do want to hear an answer to this question.